And joining us in studio is Tshepo Kgadima, political analyst, Mlondi Mkhize is ANC Youth League spokesperson. Mlondi, thanks so much for joining us. Good evening to you as well, Tshepo. So you're calling for racism to be criminalized, which in itself will be a cumbersome exercise because it does require the legal and regulatory framework. But in its essence, it is a necessity to have some form of legislation to curb racist attacks and slurs.
Well, for us, racism continues and will continue to be a demon that will confront South Africa so long as the resources of our country, the wealth of our country remains in their heads. They've got no problem, no worry about paying 20,000, 100,000 to any other institution they are directed to pay because they've got 100 million and thousands of billions. So that to them really is just a non-factor in terms of punishing them. That's why we're saying that people now this must be criminalized and people must then, in essence, be charged and be taken to court and be convicted and stay in prison. Because so long as we don't change the economic structure of South Africa, we're still going to continue to see these kind of things. Let's make an example of what has confronted our society and why do we argue that so long as money and capital remains in the hands of white people, we'll continue to get this treatment. Any other normal reasoning person would know that someone who is older to the age of your mother, you would not be urinating in their food. We know for a fact that if you respect someone who is older to be your mother, you would not be conducting or making him or her to view himself or herself in the manner that in fact loses dignity. You know, there is nothing more that South Africans have, particularly blacks have, except for dignity. And if you take away that last remaining thing, what do you expect them to remain with? When you hear people saying they are suffering from self-low esteem, these are kind of things that causes them. And we then must begin to put corrective measures to those that do it. Because this arrogance demonstrated by white people against black people is nothing than a sheer demonstration of the fact that they still control and own the wealth of South Africa, and they will do as they please, so long as you don't touch their economy, because once you touch their economy, then they complain about a lot of things, and they can even make the rand to lose its value as a currency. All
right, Mlondi, you're talking about a number of fault lines as well, but while we talk about economic transformation and how it can help to eradicate racism on a day-to-day basis in public spaces, when these outbursts rear its ugly head, people also need to be empowered enough to report it, number one, and to correct the unpalatable behavior.
Yeah, Cindy, I think, let me first preface it this way. It is, for me, very shocking that just over 10 and a half hours have lapsed since the post by Premier Helen Zille of the Western Cape. And there hasn't been any statement of rebuke, the strongest rebuke from the leader of the DA being Mmusi Maimane. And that for me is, at the end of the day, what is shocking. And also what is shocking for me is that it has become acceptable in South Africa that we say, well, that's Helen Zille, we know her to be that way. We've come now to accept what is clearly unacceptable. So as a country, this should be a cause for concern. For as long as we have this racism, both institutionalized and even at the individual level, continuing in the manner that it is doing, without it being held in check, we as a country will never ever be able to realize any of the gains or any of the aspirations that everybody else speaks about and say, Mandela this, Mandela that, Mandela that. All of that comes to naught. And for the members of the Democratic Alliance, the supporters of the Democratic Alliance, it is also shocking that all of them have now seemingly gone into a corner. They have not come out and rebuke Premier Helen Zille in the strongest terms possible. And also what is untenable and aggravating for her, if anyone who's supposed to understand and know what the constitution of this country stands upon, it should be Premier Helen Zille. And I am shocked that 10 and a half hours later, she has not, if anything, she only took a step of deleting the tweet, but the tweet is there. It's all public record now. How come she has not come out to show that she's remorseful and she's repenting, or she's repentant from this conduct, which unfortunately is racist?
But Mlondi, I think in the immediate, what should be done then to deal with racist or racism as a manner of approach to eradicate it? Because we can vent, you can complain on national media, etc., or on social media for that matter, and nothing changes. So there's a paradigm shift or attitude adjustment that is required. So if criminalization is the way to go, perhaps that's the only other solution we have.
Well, we must continue to make necessary steps to curb people from doing wrong things that they should not be doing. And if it means that we must make it a criminal offense, so far as we're concerned as the youth, we must do so. But the youth league, we are thinking that is just a measure. That is not collapsing the disease. That is just a measure of treating the disease called racism. But the manner of treating the disease is to take capital and resources of our nation away from white people. Then they will start to behave. Why do I say this? When you see someone dressed decently in a suit, like any other normal citizen, when you are employed, most probably that person you treat or perceive as your potential employer, regardless of race. Now, when you know that quite certainly you are not looking for any employment, that person to you is a non-starter. You don't care about those people. And as a result, it's worse when they are black because you can give them any name you want. Now, that's why we must make white people to understand and appreciate the fact that there are many black people who can employ them. And the only way to do that is to take the land they dispossessed our forefathers and they stole it, is to take the resources that they gained illegally. And that's what we ought to do as a nation. Outside of having done that, we'll continue to put legislation after legislation. But what we need to do without really treating, but dealing with the symptom of the disease, is to take the economy. But in the meantime, we need to legislate something that says that people must be arrested and people must be taken to jail.
Yeah.
And by the way, people vilify leaders each and every day. I have never seen anyone who has attacked black people like Helen Zille, who still enjoys that kind of space, and his party and their party will not recall it. The reason for that is because they know. That's why Mmusi Maimane will never complain. He himself is bought, rented to come and lead the DA, simply because they know that they can use black people for anything, including fronting in companies. Now we have got the first fronter in politics called Mmusi Maimane. And that's why they'll never stop, because that's what we are to them. Nothing else except for those that must work for them in order for them to create more wealth.
Yeah, but I think as black people, with the victim mentality or the approach that is often taken, you only hear the rebuke from majority black people when it comes to racist incidents, and the rest of society seems to be either on the fence or content with the situation. So again, in our interactions, Tshepo, there needs to be a level of mutual or cordial respect just based on human basic rights. And secondly, to appreciate that in our diversity, we're supposed to share in the prosperity of the country. And if black people always have to validate themselves and, as to our existence and our blackness without having to feel apologetic about it, we haven't really come far, in the 22 years of democracy.
Look, that is regrettable. Should racism and racist conduct be criminalized? Absolutely. In fact, we are 24 years late. Think of it this way. If, following the Holocaust, anti-Semitism was not treated in the most serious manner that it had been, the Jewish people would have been annihilated all over the world. The reason why that nation enjoys the protection that it does today is because strong, stern action was taken then. If we do not take a similar action as has been done on the anti-Semitism, we unfortunately will not go anywhere as a nation. And in fact, if anything, we are going to have untold agony for the majority of citizens. So this is long overdue. In fact, all members of parliament, unanimously, they needed to have come out strongly and in fact call that the legislation that Minister Masutha has put through or is currently putting through Parliament, that legislation needs to be processed expeditiously so that it is put in place, but more importantly, that it has to really serve as the strongest deterrent ever. Unless we do that, if we continue going softly as we currently are doing, we might just as well forget about what the Constitution of this republic promises the majority of people, and white people particularly, because the instances whereby there is racism, the victims are largely black people. So therefore, the white people, by and large, carry a heavier burden of ensuring that any sign of racism amongst them, any one of their own, they must rebuke that, they must frown upon that in the strongest terms possible. Because if they do not do so, we have to remember this, that the African majority or black people in general, they are in the majority in the country. If anything, if they were to retaliate, if they were to follow that song during the days of apartheid sang by Mzwakhe Mbuli, do not push us too far. If they were to go that route, there will be no white person left. Is that really the country that they want to see? This country, the Constitution is based on equality, but also Chapter 9 of the Constitution, amongst other things, emphasizes restitution. And restitution is biblical, by the way. So restitution, without restitution, we cannot even talk about cohesion, social cohesion. We cannot even talk about equality. Those have to be premised on restitution, and restitution, we can then be able to deal effectively with racism. But racism, it is a disease that we have to deal with in the strongest terms possible, and that is to legislate harsher punishment against those that are involved in racist conduct.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Mlondi, just very briefly, your call to action for our society at large regarding this issue.
Well, for us, moving forward, call is simple. Our people need to stand up to fight the demon, and they need to stand up peacefully. I think the point made by the last speaker is quite valid and ought to be taken serious. Because if one day black people decide to stand up against white people, what would South Africa become? It will become a battlefield for a race war. So we don't need to go that way. Must legislate, criminalize it, take away their economy that makes them to be arrogant, and continue to confront issues that are confronting our nation, including urging our voters to stop voting for the DA, because it's becoming evident that once they take over the country, they want to bring back apartheid. That's what they want to do. So let us stand up for ourselves. Let us be combat ready to confront anything outside of getting violent, because at some point people are going to lose their sense and they'll get violent. And once it gets violent, it is very difficult to calm down such a turmoil.